Robert Reich was Secretary of Labor under President Clinton, and he holds himself out as an economist, although by education he's a lawyer.
Reich recently made a video, apparently from the beach, and totally full of nonsense, called How the Super Rich Are Killing Social Security.
It's time to scrap the cap and make the rich pay more in Social Security taxes.
And who better than Professor Davies to refute him, point by point.
One of the things that Robert Reich does in his video is to compare how much people pay into Social Security to their incomes.
For example, a CEO earning $20 million a year pays Social Security taxes on roughly 1% of their income, while a worker earning under the cap pays Social Security taxes on 100% of their income.
Reich is correct. There is a marked inequality, but it goes in the opposite direction that Reich would have us believe. For example, let's suppose we take a average person who starts his or her career at age 25, earning $20,000. Over the course of his or her career, this worker will pay into Social Security a little over $200,000. That worker who started his or her career at $20,000 will receive back from Social Security $2.70 for every dollar he or she paid in. And if you do the math, that's about a 4% return on money. Now, what about a more middle-class worker? Suppose we have a worker, college educated, who joins the workforce at age 25, earning $80,000. This person will receive back $1.60 for every dollar he paid in, versus the $20,000 worker who's receiving back $2.70 for every dollar he pays in. Now let's go to the extreme. This is where Reich wants to draw our attention. Let's talk about the rich. Here's someone who begins his or her career, age 25, earning $300,000. This person will pay a total of $3.1 million over his or her career into Social Security and receive back $1.8 million. Or this person is receiving back from Social Security 60 cents for every dollar he or she pays in. That's the equivalent of a negative 2.5% return on his or her Social Security taxes. So in terms of inequality, Reich is absolutely correct. There is marked inequality in the Social Security program. However, it's unequal in favor of the poor, and that's precisely how we designed Social Security. It's working as designed, that the rich pay in more, receive back less, the poor pay in less, receive back more.
Social Security is one of the most popular and successful government programs ever created.
Well, it's certainly popular. I don't know if that's because people like it or because they don't have any choice. Everybody has to participate. As to being successful, this is a program that has gone on since the 1930s, 1940s. There was a major change in the 1980s where Social Security tax benefits heretofore had been untaxable. Now all of a sudden, the income from Social Security benefits are taxable. That's, call it what you like, but it's in effect the federal government defaulting on its Social Security promises. It promised retirees that they'd receive a certain amount of benefits in exchange for their Social Security taxes, and now all of a sudden they're going to receive something less. According to Social Security's figures themselves, Social Security will be able to pay about 77% of what's promised. Now, what does that mean? It means one of two things. Either people who are paying into Social Security all of a sudden will have to pay 20 to 22% more in payroll taxes. That's certainly not what Social Security had been promising them when they first joined the workforce. Or people who are retirees will have to receive 20 to 22% less benefits, which also is not what they were promised. So either way you look at it, Social Security will be reneging on its promises. I don't call that a successful program.
Not only helping retirees, but it's also keeping 26 million people out of poverty.
The question here is, what would poverty have looked like had it not been for Social Security. Certainly there are households on the low end of the income spectrum that have long been on the low end of the income spectrum, and for those households, certainly Social Security is a benefit and may well be keeping them out of poverty. However, the majority of households fall into an entirely different category, and that's the category of households that have paid into Social Security and when the householders retire will receive something back, and we can point to this and say, were it not for Social Security, these householders would be in poverty in their retired years. However, we need to ask the question, what would those households have done had Social Security not existed? Had Social Security not existed, those households would have an extra 12+% of their incomes available to invest in private retirement funds, into 401k plans, into IRAs. And by the numbers, the typical household who invests that much money, roughly 12% of your income, into a private retirement fund, would end up with substantially more income, to the tune of 5 to 10 times as much as in retirement as what Social Security provides. So for those households, Social Security is not holding them out of poverty. If anything, it's trying its darndest to push them into it. This video is brought to you by Students for Liberty's Regional Coordinator Program. As an educator, I've worked with many students over the years, and SFL coordinators are some of the smartest, most well-organized and driven young people I've had the pleasure to meet. On the other hand, Robert Reich is, well, not a young person.
Boomer retirees like me might be soaking up some sun, but we're not soaking up all of the program's funds. The Social Security trustees anticipated the boom in boomer retirements.
Yes, they did. And they've been warning politicians for decades that Social Security was going to hit the wall because people are living longer. And politicians have done the reasonable thing from their perspective. They haven't touched this because it's politically dangerous. They kicked the can down the road. They made small fixes to Social Security so it could last a few more years, hopefully a few years longer than the politician's expected career, so that some other politician can deal with the problem. And now we're reaching the point where the can has been kicked down the road so far, we're kind of at the end of the road. And now we're looking at doing something major. And at this point, we face a fork in the road. Down one path, we find a way to make Social Security remain viable. And down that path, we're going to be talking about substantial cuts in benefits and or substantial increases in payroll taxes. Down the other path, we look at scaling back Social Security and getting people off of it, getting them into private retirement accounts that pay much, much more than Social Security pays. Now, the politically expedient thing to do is not go down that second path. The politically expedient thing to do is to keep Social Security running as long as we can. The problem there is Social Security is ultimately a Ponzi scheme. The people who are paying into the system right now their money is not going into a savings account for them. It's going directly out the door to people who are drawing Social Security benefits. That kind of a system is destined to failure. The only question is it going to be sooner or later? And the longer we breathe life into Social Security, the bigger the problem becomes when Social Security finally hits the wall.
If the rich don't start paying their fair share. The trustees of Social Security, of which yours truly was once a member back when I had thicker hair, say the program will only be able to pay full benefits until 2033.
The rich are already paying more in Social Security taxes. Social Security is a net plus only for the poor. It's a net negative, and a solid net negative for the rich. That's the way we designed it. What Robert Reich is suggesting is that this inequality that exists, that the rich pay more than their fair share, is not unequal enough, that the rich should pay even more still than their fair share.
One plan introduced in Congress would eliminate the cap on earnings over $250,000 and also subject investment income to Social Security taxes. It's estimated that this would extend the solvency of Social Security for the next 75 years without raising taxes on 93% of American households.
If we manage to keep Social Security solvent, we simply push further into the future Social Security's inevitable insolvency. All we can do are put patches that push us forward a couple of decades. But every decade we push Social Security forward, we extend its life, the ultimate problem becomes larger. Had we ended Social Security in the 1980s instead of imposing the patch that Social Security benefits that previously weren't taxable are now going to be taxable, we would have ended Social Security and in so doing faced a problem that was perhaps 1/10 the size of the problem we face today. If we extend Social Security today, the problem that we will face come 2070 or 2090 will be 10 times the size of the problem we face today. The ultimate problem is that Social Security, by design, is insolvent. The solution is to return it to its roots as a safety net for the poorest Americans, and for the rest of Americans, move them off of Social Security and into private retirement accounts that pay far more in terms of benefits than Social Security could ever pay. Politicians will never use the word insolvent when it comes to Social Security. What they'll say instead is the Social Security payroll tax is going to increase, and they're going to argue to the workers who now have to pay more Social Security taxes that this is a good thing. It's a good thing because although you'll be paying more of your paycheck into Social Security will be there for you when you retire. And so the workers will tend to feel, if not good about this, at least less resentful. What politicians aren't telling you is that every dollar you pay into Social Security, if instead you paid that into a private savings account, that dollar would yield 4 times the return from the private savings account as what it will yield from Social Security. Social Security ultimately is a good investment for only 2 groups of people, the very poor and the politicians.
Widening inequality has cost the Social Security Trust Fund an estimated $1.4 trillion since 1983. The solution is obvious. It's time to scrap the cap and make the rich pay more in Social Security taxes.
Professor Davies' response to this argument is killer, you'll see. And if you'd like to see him lecture in person, join us at LibertyCon International in Washington, D.C. Visit libertycon.com to register.
What Robert Reich says is obvious is not a solution, it's a band-aid. If we follow Robert Reich's prescription, Social Security's ills will not be cured. They'll simply be put off until some later date when Robert Reich and today's politicians aren't around to reap the consequences of what they propose. Robert Reich and others are held up in the public eye not because their ideas are correct, but because their ideas agree with those ideas that the politicians want to put forth to get themselves elected. This is a phenomenon that you'll see amongst many so-called economists. Those who become popular in large part because politicians point to them and hold them up and appoint them to positions of prestige, which then gives them even more publicity than they had before. And we have to keep in mind, what are politicians' goals? Their goals are not necessarily to do what's in the best interest of the voters. Their goal is to get elected. And if it's easier to get elected by telling you, elect me and I'll save Social Security, than it is by telling you, elect me and I'll get rid of Social Security because ultimately it isn't savable. I'll say the first thing because it's the first thing that gets me elected. And who will I point to as academic window dressing for my policies? I'll point to those academics, to those people in the public sphere who support my particular position.
This is where you come in. Share this video and help spread the word about the real threat to Social Security and what can be done about it.
The way to fix Social Security is to shut it down. Now, on the one hand, shutting down Social Security is good for younger workers who would then be able to put their money into private retirement accounts instead of paying them to Social Security, but it would be devastating for many retirees. So the question is, how would we manage this transition from a world in which our workers are paying into Social Security and then depending on it upon retirement to a world in which our workers are putting their savings into private retirement funds and living off of that in their retirement? The way to manage that transition is to make use of the fact that Social Security is a horrible investment. The typical worker who pays into Social Security receives back the equivalent of about a 1% or 2% return on the Social Security taxes he or she paid in. That rate of return is so abysmal that the average American worker would be better off paying into Social Security until about age 40, and then at age 41 walking away and saying, henceforth, don't tax me anymore for Social Security payroll tax, and in exchange, I forego all of my Social Security retirement benefits. What will happen is that the typical worker starting about age 40 would then have an additional 12% of his wages that had heretofore gone to Social Security taxes available to him to put into a private retirement fund. And with that extra 12% going into a private retirement fund that pays substantially more than Social Security benefits do, by the time that worker hits age 65, 67, and is looking at retirement, what that worker can expect to receive from that private retirement account would actually be larger than the Social Security retirement benefits he or she gave up back at age 40.
If we want to ensure Social Security's long-term future and that working people can retire with dignity, we must make the wealthy pay their fair share.
The way to prepare for a world without Social Security benefits is to put money into private retirement accounts, into IRAs, into Roths, into 401ks, and young workers typically should be in equities, in the stock market, and people will point to that and say, but that's risky. Stocks can go up, but stocks can go down. You could lose your money. Yes, the stock market is risky. However, over the long haul, and when for someone who's 32 years old, you're looking at 40 years until retirement, that's an extremely long period of time. That's enough of a stretch that you could survive something akin to the Great Depression that we had in 1929 and still come out at the end looking good. So yes, on the one hand, the stock market is a risky investment, but I warn people not to fall into the trap of thinking that Social Security is a safe investment, because Social Security itself tells us that it's facing insolvency. Individual companies in the stock market face insolvency, but at no point has the entire stock market faced insolvency. But that's what we're looking at with Social Security.